Welcome to Furious Recaps. In today's video, we will be going through the 2018 sci-fi action movie Venom. Turn on subtitles and spoilers ahead. The film begins with a space shuttle from the Life Foundation catching up to the fire and crash landing in East Malaysia, delivering 4 samples of symbiotes, Mayhem, Scream, Riot, and Venom. After the Life Foundation alerts the police about their space shuttle, medics arrive in the area to retrieve one survivor, astronaut J.J. Jameson III. When J.J. Jameson is placed in an ambulance, something that is hooked into him comes to life and attacks everyone within, forcing the car to flip and crash. An EMT emerges from the debris, now infected with a symbiote, an alien parasite, and starts to approach the Life Foundation, who launched the space shuttle. In the next scene, we meet reporter Eddie Brock in San Francisco, who lives with his fiancée, Annie Wying, a lawyer who is poised to represent the Life Foundation and its CEO, Clarton Drake. Eddie Brock is well known for his television news show, The Eddie Brock Report, in which he investigates events and shares them with others. He works differently than others, and as a result, he is well liked by his coworkers. Eddie's supervisor sends him to interview Drake when he gets to work, but he instructs Eddie not to ask Drake any questions about his work or anything else unrelated, and to return with some positive news. Annie asks the same, since she knows that Eddie can be hot-headed, which is what got him driven out of New York. Later that night, when Eddie wakes up late to drink water, he discovers an email on Annie's computer with information about 3 verified deaths as a result of the shuttle crash. He also learns that Life Foundation has been performing deadly experiments for the past few years, and that if this trend continues, many innocent people could become victims. He then notes down the important information and decides to ask them in the interview with Drake. Eddie goes out against the orders to interview Drake about his space travel program and begins questioning Drake about the deaths and how he is responsible for them. An angry Drake then ends the interview and asks Eddie to leave. Eddie then informs his supervisor about the fact, and his boss fires him due to his fear of Drake. Annie is also fired from her work as a result of Eddie's mess, which leads to the end of Eddie and Annie's relationship. When the EMT returns to Malaysia, he stumbles into a local market and begins to devour an eel. The symbiote creates a sword around her arm, and she cuts the vendor's throat after the vendor chastises her for it. Onlookers try to retaliate by attacking her, but the symbiote releases quills that kills everyone in the area. The EMT then approaches an elderly woman, and the symbiote kills the EMT and hooks onto the deadly woman. 6 months later, Drake is continuing his symbiote study by conducting tests on homeless people. He speaks to one person named Isaac to make it appear as if he is embarking on a monumental mission for humanity. Drake unleashes a symbiote into Isaac's room and allows it to take over his body. This is all being witnessed by the Foundation staff, including Dr. Dora Skirth, who seems to be frightened by the act. Isaac appears to be well for a while before convulsing, and now the symbiote departs Isaac's now dead corpse, having devoured his organs. Elsewhere, Eddie is now jobless and living alone in a little squalid apartment in San Francisco. He travels to a local business where he knows the clerk, Mrs. Chen, but Eddie notices that she is continually being stolen of her money by a thug, and she is powerless to stop it, because the attacker is armed. Dr. Dora Skirth, a Life Foundation scientist who is disturbed by Drake's experimentation on humans, approaches Eddie. She begs Eddie's help in exposing Drake, but he refuses since he has lost interest in what happens to humanity. Later, Eddie rushes to Annie's apartment to pay her a visit, only to find her returning from a date with Dr. Dan Lewis, her new lover. When they are alone, Eddie admits to Annie that he misses her and that he blames Drake for what happened to him, but Annie reminds him that he is the one who has reached rock bottom and asks the very intriguing questions to Drake. After that, Eddie invites Skirth to join her on the mission. Eddie is brought to the Life Foundation's headquarters by Skirth, who sneaks him in. Eddie snaps photographs of symbiotes victims' grisly presentation. One of the living individuals he recognizes is Maria, a homeless woman with whom Eddie is friendly. He tries to break her out of the cell, but Maria counters with an attack. The symbiote in her body then hooks onto Eddie, causing him to flee. Eddie is pursued by security officers, but he now looks to have increased strength and agility, allowing him to run very fast. When Drake and his team discover Maria's body, they realize that there is a symbiote specimen on the loose. Drake ultimately finds out that Skirth was the one who brought Eddie to the Foundation without his consent. Drake persuades Skirth to reveal that Eddie was involved, and then he locks up her in a cell, where another symbiote kills her. Drake then dispatches a mercenary squad led by Ronald Terries to track down Eddie. At home, Eddie begins to get strange symptoms. He has an unusual appetite for strange foods, for example, frozen tater tots and rotten meat, and he has a fever and begins to vomit. A low, snarling voice begins to talk to him as well. He finds Annie and Dan on a date, where he showed his abnormal behavior by going through other people's meal and then sitting in a lobster tank eating real lobsters. Annie and Dan believe that they must assist Eddie. Later, Dan performs an MRI on Eddie, but the test frequency creates a terrible distortion in his head. Hence, Dan calls a halt to the test and instructs Eddie to return home safely. In the apartment, Eddie is in pain again as his neighbors play his music too loudly. Eddie goes to advise him to lower the music, but he's mocked until the symbiote transforms Eddie's face into a horrific appearance, at which point the neighbor agrees. Meanwhile, Therese and his henchmen break into Eddie's house to apprehend him. Eddie attempts to give up, but the symbiote has different ideas. Eddie finds himself fighting with the goons unwillingly with the help of the symbiote as Therese and his men attack. Therese records this to show off to Drake, but he is blown away by Eddie's symbiote compatibility. As more of Therese's men arrive, Eddie exits the apartment. Eddie is then pursued through the city while attempting to locate a motorcycle to ride, until Therese rams his car into Eddie. The symbiote then assists him in taking out the goons and maneuvering around the streets with ease. As he gets closer to Eddie, the symbiote takes over his entire body, turning him into Venom. Another goon shoots at Venom before he can kill Therese. Venom leaves Therese, but bites off the goon's head and then escapes. Eddie ends up near a lighthouse where he magically heals his broken bones. He's embarrassed at seeing a man's head chewed off, but Venom, what the symbiote calls itself, speaks to him and says that he is a superb host. Eddie is told that he wants to live. He merely needs to comply and assist Venom in returning to its rightful place, that is, the space. At night, when Eddie tries to meet his boss for giving him the evidence of the Life Foundation laboratory, he is stopped by the guards. Venom fights them off. Eddie and Annie meet after she passes by his flat and notices that it is a crime scene, and she takes him to Dan's office for additional assistance. Eddie has a problem, and she knows it. Eddie is instructed by Venom to speak with Annie, as Venom has developed a liking for her. Eddie apologizes for his mistakes, but Annie says that it's not the right moment. Later, Dan performs a second test on Eddie and discovers that the symbiote is a parasite, which Venom does not like to be called. Annie activates a high frequency that causes the symbiote to get away from Eddie's body after Dan informs him that he and the symbiote are essentially draining each other of life. Eddie feels really happy and light as the parasite is out of his body. After Eddie leaves, Venom escapes through the vents and clutches upon a tiny puppy. Finally, Therese and his men capture Eddie and transport him to Drake. Meanwhile, the elderly woman from earlier finds a small girl to utilize a new symbiote host at an airport. The girl travels to San Francisco and meets Drake, after which the symbiote takes over Drake's body. In the next scene, Eddie is interrogated by Drake concerning the symbiote's whereabouts. Suddenly, Drake's symbiote Riot forms itself around his body and inquires about Venom. Eddie is aware that Riot has taken control of Drake. He also discovers Drake's plan to return to space in search of more symbiotes to bring back to Earth so that they can utilize humans as hosts and experiment with human lives. On the other hand, Annie locates the dog that is hosting Venom and proceeds to the Life Foundation, where she now serves as Venom's host, making her She-Venom. Annie assists Eddie in breaking free. She then chews off Therese's skull, which terrifies her, and kisses Eddie to return Venom. Drake, on the other hand, gives his scientists 5 minutes to launch the space shuttle. One of the scientists discovered that Drake has been taken by the symbiote and devises a scheme to prevent Drake from launching the space shuttle. Just then, Riot seizes control of Drake, morphs itself with a sharp blade and assassinates all of the scientists and continues to launch the space shuttle. Eddie and Venom, on the other hand, are on their way to find Drake and Riot before they board their rocket. The two men battle using their symbiote forms when Annie uses a frequency to confuse them both and force the symbiotes to leave their hosts. When Drake sees Riot, he wants to reconnect with him, but Eddie pushes him off of the balcony. Eddie turns around and is impaled by Riot, who then climbs onto the rock as it begins to take flight after stabbing Eddie. Eddie is found by Venom, who clings to him and heals the impalement wound. They then leap atop the rocket, and Venom cuts the fuel line, causing the rocket to catch fire, explode, and burn Drake and Riot alive. Venom then detaches from Eddie's body and appears to die as a result of Rocket's flame, and Eddie falls into the ocean. In the next scene, Eddie and Annie appear to have patched up with their friendship. He discusses being requested to bring his show back and do a Drake show, but he has other plans, including meeting with someone in the prison. Eddie has a conversation with Venom inside him. Though he keeps this as a secret from Annie, he then goes away and comes across an elderly gentleman who urges him to keep fighting for what he believes in. Venom, on the other hand, seems to be interested in eating the man's dog. Eddie wanders around with Venom, trying to persuade him that if they're going to remain together, he can't just eat whoever he wants, and that they can only go for the truly evil. Who are evil people? Venom inquires. Eddie responds, the people who harm other people. He enters Mrs. Chen's shop, and when the thug from the earlier attempts to rob her reappears in front of Mrs. Chen, Eddie transforms into Venom and devours the thug. Eddie inquires as to what they should do next, to which Venom says that they are free to do whatever they wish. In the mid-credits, Eddie travels to San Quentin prison for an interview with the newest subject, Cletus Cassidy, a serial killer. Cassidy anticipates Eddie's arrival and writes to welcome Eddie with the blood. Cassidy promises that when he is free, there will be carnage. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get new movie recaps.